Hey folks, Jason Pye from Peach Pundit here for the first ever Peach Pundit Podcast, which I guess is the unofficial name, or maybe we can make it the official name, guys, if we want to. I am joined by former state legislator, former state House member Buzz Brockway, and also former state House member Scott Turner. Guys, both contributors to Peach Pundit. Buzz has come back into the fold. I'm actually impressed, Buzz, with myself here because I didn't really have to twist your arm to get you to come back and join the new Peach Pundit, which is really kind of the same as the old Peach Pundit. And Scott's been in since I texted him back in August and was like, "Hey, do you want to help kick off a new Peach Pundit?" And I'm glad you guys both are back and joining for the podcast today.
Glad to be here. It's gonna be fun.
Is it though, Scott? Is it? You're on mute, Scott.
I think it'll be as fun as we make it. We're talking about Georgia politics here. There's always intrigue. There's always drama. There's always pettiness. There's always something to talk about.
Ain't that the truth? So I guess we'll start at the. I mean, God, we have 40 minutes and there's like months to worth of stuff to talk about. But I guess everything that's I guess Republicans in Georgia are adjusting to a sort of a new reality that their once stranglehold on electoral politics in the state's probably not what it used to be, given that Trump lost the state back in November. And yes, he lost it in November, not in when the lawsuits were kicked out. He lost on November 3rd to Joe Biden. Yep. We had Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue both lost, Loeffler by a wider margin than Perdue. I guess I'll start with Scott. You were in the legislature. You had to deal with all this stuff. You were outgoing. You didn't run for re-election, and you had to deal with all this stuff your final day. So, what do you make of everything that's happened over the past several months?
Well, it's it's interesting to me, the rumor mill. Maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the potential candidates, especially in light of Senator Perdue letting us know yesterday that he wasn't going to seek the nomination to run against Senator Warnock. But the last 3 months of being a state rep is usually when you're retiring. Buzz could talk about this. It's sort of quiet, right? I mean, that's it's you're outgoing, you're cleaning out your office. I actually had to keep my office open and up and running until the last week of the year. I was getting tens of thousands of emails, most of them from angry people saying, "Stop the steal." A lot of misinformation, a lot of disinformation out there. And I served on the House Governmental Affairs Committee, which dealt with election law in Georgia. Yeah, Buzz was on that committee before he retired as well. So it was like the perfect storm of I never really quite felt like I was leaving, and that kind of carried over into this year. But it didn't, I didn't have that closure period. So, but looking forward, we are where we are, and we're going to have to find some good candidates if we're going to knock off Senator Warnock in 2 years as Republicans. And to that end, maybe we should talk a little bit about Herschel Walker and the rumors around Herschel, right?
Well, I want to get to the Senate race, but Buzz, I mean, we're all friends on Facebook. I mean, the three of us have been friends for years, and I know Buzz has been in largely the same place that I've been. And Scott, I know you have been too, just like starting to treat each other as humans again, rather than ideological opponents. And that therefore, because you don't agree with my position on something, you must hate America. It seems to be that's where the state of national politics had been trending, and certainly to some degree in the state as well. But you've been pretty outspoken in terms of returning to sort of the not intellectual roots of conservatism, but the consistency that has always been part of at the core of the conservative movement and communicating those ideas to people. So, I mean, what do you make of everything?
Yeah, I think, well, look, I think it's pretty obvious what happened. And I posted this on Peach Pundit the other day. Trump lost Georgia for a pretty simple reason. There were Republicans, mostly around Metro Atlanta, would be my guess, who still consider themselves Republicans, voted for David Perdue, voted for their Republican state house or state senator, voted for their local sheriffs, etc. but just couldn't bring themselves to vote for Donald Trump. Now, it's maybe not a lot of people, but it was enough people in a close election already to give Joe Biden a slim victory in Georgia. And I think that's the explanation. And I think, Republicans have to grapple with that, have to come to grips with that, if they're going to attempt to try to put together a coalition that can win again statewide. That's kind of where you have to start. Okay, and then what were the circumstances that led to that, to people who otherwise are Republicans saying, I can't vote for this guy? And what can we learn from that? And what can Republicans do moving forward? I do think it's a mistake for conservatives and Republicans to think, oh, all right, now we can just go back to what the Republican Party was like in 2015, because I don't think you can do that. You can't put that, genie's out of the bottle. You're not going to go back to those days before where Trump was not around. He's changed the party, and look, being fair to Trump, he brought to the table some issues that Republicans had ignored. I'm a free trader. Maybe everybody else on this call is generally a free trader, but there are negative consequences to that have impacted, certain parts of the country. And Trump spoke to, one of the things Trump did was speak to those people and say, I'm gonna go to bat for you. And we should pay attention to that. You can't just shut down manufacturing plants and think that there will be no consequences for small towns across America. So there are things we can learn. There are things we should talk about that Republicans should pay attention to. But yeah, we've got to get back to focusing on principles, being a party of ideas, being a party that puts forward ideas, and not just a party that argues on Twitter.
Well, I would say, and Scott, hold on one second. The free trade thing, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, has really bothered me. Mm-hmm. just in terms of what Trump was saying, because I know free trade is right. It works best, but free traders, including myself, we haven't communicated that to people well at all. Yeah. And you look at there's a great study I saw. It's a few years old at this point. I think it came out like 2014. 88% of the job losses that have occurred over the last however many years have not occurred because of trade. They've occurred because of increased productivity. Right. And that includes reliance on automation, for example. And the robots in part are to blame. Certainly not all, but in part. But Scott, I don't want to. Yeah. With it. Go ahead.
Buzz made a point that I think needs to. I want to offer some data around to kind of hammer home. And he talked about how there were Republicans who still considered themselves to be Republicans who wouldn't vote for Donald Trump, but still voted Republican. And we saw that happen in my home county here in Cherokee County. We're 75% Republican. But if you look at, there are 3 senators, but one of the senators barely represents any of us. So we're going to say that there's 2. And those 2 are Senator Beach and Senator Thompson. They split the county almost equally. And between the 2 of them, they're down ballot. They were running against a Democrat. Each of them had a Democrat opponent in the ballot. In Cherokee County alone, they outpaced Donald Trump by 7,000 votes. That's over half of the margin victory for Joe Biden in Georgia. 12,000 votes for the margin of victory. 7,000 Republicans. I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's one county.
Yeah, right? In Cherokee County, right? So we know where they live. We know where half of the margin of victory lives. They're in my neighborhood, and they decided that they would vote for a Brandon Beach or a Bruce Thompson, but not for Donald Trump. And I think that is really telling. We start looking at the down ballot races where we had opposed people. My successor has no record. He had 0 name ID. He won in a contested primary, but after that, nobody knew who that guy was. He got more votes than Donald Trump in Cherokee County in his 21st House district. So that is something that I think we can't go back and say we want the party to look like it was in 2015, but we're going to have to do some work to get those folks back to voting for the top of the ticket again.
Well, and that kind of parlays into what you want to talk about, Scott, and it's certainly what I want to talk about as well. And Buzz, presumably you, is that we have elections coming up, November 2022. We're less than what, a year and 10 months away from that. So
shut your dirty mouth.
Neither of you are on the ballot. And I bet Buzz is thanking the sweet Lord above for not winning that Secretary of State primary back in 2018.
Never been so happy to lose a race in my life.
I bet Josh McCoon's saying the same thing as well. But but look, we it's obvious the Republican Party has problems, particularly as it relates to racial demographics. The same problem is going to present itself in 2022. You look at the Senate race. Yes, Raphael Warnock is going to be on the ballot. Stacey Abrams is likely to be on the ballot, running against Brian Kemp in a rematch from 2018. So you got to assume that the black voter turnout is going to be there, and not to mention that Latinos are growing and as share of voters in Georgia. So what are Republicans going to do? I mean, we mentioned Herschel Walker as a potential candidate. You put, and I'm sorry, I know both of you got, well, and at least Scott liked Kelly Loeffler. Buzz, that presumably you did too, but she was a terrible candidate. So how do you how do you fix this?
Yeah, I don't think she was a great candidate, but she was a really good person. And, I think she had a couple of things striked against her starting out. Number one is she wasn't part of the Republican establishment, that Doug Collins was part of. And therefore the Republican establishment in Georgia really wanted to pick their person, and we saw that happen with David Ralston basically telling the House of Representatives, vote for my guy, don't vote for the governor's guy. So you even created this divide between kind of the establishment Ralstonites and the conservative Kemp people. And it was serving under that dynamic was really weird, being in the legislature, because we had been told, well, Buzz was in the House, that what the governor wanted, the governor got, when the governor's name was Nathan Deal. So having this, all of a sudden, all this intrigue around the power struggle between a speaker and the sitting governor was amazing. And he wanted Doug Collins, and Brian Kemp wanted to try to appeal to a demographic. He found a successful businesswoman who, when you get to know her on a personal level, is a very kind, gentle, and sweet person. And she's just a good person. So, but she's not a political person. She'd never run for office before. So her candidacy was somewhat lacking. I have to admit that. And, she fell into some possibly what could be labeled rookie mistakes kind of early on in her time in office, but she was still a good person. That being said,
I'm not doubting she was a good person, but some of the questions she made in her early days, I mean, it seemed like that her congressional office up in DC, her Senate office, was basically being run out of the campaign. In fact, I was explicitly told that by one person. And then like she associated herself with like the worst elements of the Senate Republican Conference. That's Josh Hawley, that's Tom Cotton, that's Marco Rubio. Those were the people she was allying with in the Senate. She was introducing legislation with them on more than one occasion. And and Hawley to me is like, he is the person who is trying to put an intellectual side to Trumpism. And I think he's exceedingly dangerous, and allying with that's not an option.
I think I'm just keeping the conversation kind of Georgia focused for just a second. I just think that she was inexperienced, and as a politician, which gets to the point where I think whoever we elect or whoever we nominate to run against Senator Warnock needs to be an experienced politician. That's what I'm going to be looking for. I'm not looking for a Herschel Walker. I think Herschel Walker brings zero to the table as far as being savvy enough to be a senator in the United States. And that's just, I'm going to put that out there. And, and I love the Bulldogs to a certain degree. And they're not my first and foremost team, but I've been to enough Georgia Bulldog games to love them. And I understand what Herschel represents as far as being a part of the Georgia culture and the lore here, but he is not qualified to be the US.
So what you're saying is, don't run, Herschel, don't run.
Don't run, Herschel, don't run. Which, maybe maybe we should adopt that for Buzz and myself as well. We don't know.
Well, I actually want to get Buzz's 2 cents here, because Buzz, I mean, I mean, Scott's right. We got to keep it Georgia focused, and I got a little carried away there for a second. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking at 2022, who's your ideal Senate candidate?
It's not an easy question. I was honestly a little surprised when former Senator Perdue decided not to run. Doug Collins, who is another one that folks who think might be looking at this race. He's got a job and now he's got a radio show. So, that doesn't sound like a guy who's gearing up to launch a campaign here in the next few months. So maybe I'm wrong. He may still do that, but it'll be interesting because if Purdue is out, since Purdue is out, if Collins is out, Loeffler has formed a pack to try to do some stuff. But I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think other people will start to emerge. I think, and other people will look at that and say, when I don't know that there's anybody out there who's going to clear the field at this point. I think David Perdue might have been able to, for the most part, clear the field.
Yeah.
And with all due respect to Georgia Bulldog fans out there, I tend to agree with Scott. This is not the time to throw a rookie candidate out there. Herschel, the name ID is outstanding. He's beloved in this state. Go run for Congress. Go get some experience in a campaign someplace, and not a high stakes race like this. So I don't know. The GOP's got their work cut out for them to try to find a candidate who fits that bill. There may be, I think there's state senators out there that are interesting people who might be able to do something. But I also think that, one of the problems I think both Purdue and Loeffler fell into, it obviously did not work, especially against Warnock. They tried to paint him as a radical, and it didn't work. They talked about socialism, et cetera, et cetera. It didn't work. And, for the life of me, I don't know what if David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler had been reelected, what did they want to do when they got there?
Yeah.
And I think, yes, fear works, negative politics works. It just does. But you also have to articulate what you want to do. And I think that's one thing that Republicans have failed to do in recent years and need to get back to doing.
To her credit, I'll say she had legislative proposals on healthcare and other things that I thought were,
she never talked about them on the campaign trail.
Right. She never talked about them. And even some of those legislative proposals were, they were obviously messaging attempts, which is, everything that happens in Washington, D.C., except for the stuff that actually gets passed is a messaging bill. And she was introducing a lot of messaging bills that really didn't make a lot of sense. Or, it's not they didn't make a lot of sense. They weren't serious. You knew they weren't going to get passed. Yeah. I guess is what I'm trying to say. But and I don't know. I think both of you are right in the sense that it can't be a rookie candidate. We can't have a rookie politician going, or at least someone who wants to be a freshman senator from Georgia who has no political experience. We can't have another one of those nominees because we saw how bad Loeffler did. And look, I'll say this too. Purdue didn't do much better. He ran. There was a time coming up towards Christmas where I don't have cable TV, but I have an AT&T TV subscription, and so I'll put it on, watch sports or whatever's on. And I was watching some movie or something like that, and they had back-to-back campaign commercials: Warnock, Ossoff, NRSC, and Loeffler. I don't recall seeing many Purdue ads, and I remember and I remember one ad in particular that I did see of his early on, where he repeated the claim against him, the negative attack against him. It's like, why would you do that?
Yeah, it's politics 101. The ads that I remember for Senator Perdue during the runoff were, I was not guilty of what they accused me of.
Right.
Which, I just thought was mindless, frankly. But we talk about bad campaigns. He made the strategic error of the campaign of the entire cycle by refusing to show up to debate John Ossoff, and he gave him a whole hour for political junkies to hear John Ossoff talk about his vision and how he was going to be different than David Perdue. And David Perdue, the knock on David Perdue. Now, listen, I'm a huge fan of David Perdue, but the knock on him is that he's superior, he's condescending, and he knows what's better than you. And and it just came across as a fulfilling prophecy of of this is a guy who's an elitist. He won't even come and debate the issues with a guy who's nipping at his heels in the polls.
And that's that point right there, nipping at his heels in the polls. Everybody saw how close that race was, even going into November, and he is on your tail. And by that point, some polls, by the runoff, some polls were showing Ossoff was going to win, or at least was like 2-3 points ahead. Why would you decline that debate? And you're right about Purdue being, arrogant or talking down to people. Remember the attack on Karen Handel back in 2014 because she didn't have a college degree and was going to have to deal with complex issues and so on and so forth. And running for election is complex. Yeah. I mean, but it's not that complex where you can't adhere to politics 101. But
I think Karen Handel proved that she could run an executive office when she was Secretary of State. I think she did a great job while she was there. And so when he made that comment, it helped cement that reputation as kind of a condescending elitist. Which is not exactly what we need as Republicans, right? We need to make our messaging more accessible to everybody. And that's really, I think, where we can get into things like criminal justice reform, which, Republicans have done a fantastic job of. We can go into minority communities and we can talk about how we are trying to reform the system in a way that benefits them directly, so that they feel more free walking down the street in their own communities. We can talk about the economic opportunities that we've tried to bring to the state. So everybody who wants a job can get one. We can talk about those types of efforts in a way that I think would appeal to these minority communities. And it's something we simply haven't done. We've been more fear mongering. We've been more, I'm less radical than Raphael Warnock and therefore vote for me.
But Buzz said something a second ago that I want to kind of circle back to because I think we probably have about 10-15 minutes left. But you said something that I wanted to circle back to because you talked about socialism. I remember that NRSC ad because they talked about socialism, they talked about tax increases, and they talked about the rising cost of college. They talk about Warnock and Ossoff wanting to end cash bail, which I thought was unusual. But so the term socialism and the fear mongering that Scott mentioned, it seems to have run its course in the political discourse, and it's becoming almost like the word fascist or Nazi, where it's kind of lost all meaning at this point in time. And because I gather, also there are things that Republican candidates legislation they introduce or legislation they talk about or policies they talk about that are, to kind of broadly criticize here, are probably considered socialist. It just seems like the fear mongering and that stuff is just it's not resonating with voters anymore. It's time to find other issues that you can talk about. What Senator Mike Lee at the federal level talks about, a positive reform agenda.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And I think, what did Warnock do? Warnock ran ads with him and puppies. And he just displayed himself as a soft-spoken, thoughtful man who cares about the community and just wants to go up there and do nice things for people. So the socialism thing just did not stick. Didn't stick.
Yeah, and that puppy ad was a stroke of pure political genius. Yeah, it was so simple. It was so simple. It was so basic. Everybody's like, "Oh, it's so cheesy. Voters are never going to buy that." Here's this nice guy with his dog.
Everybody knows socialists don't like puppies, so he can't be a socialist, right?
Right. No, exactly. So with what limited time we have left, I know both of you are probably at least somewhat following what's going on in the Georgia General Assembly. And while I'm trying to keep our day jobs out of this, I know that we all follow legislation for our day jobs. So is there anything that's happening in the legislature that you guys are watching and you're like, wow, that's great movement on that bill, or I cannot believe they're doing that? Is there anything that you're seeing right now?
Yeah, well, hopefully, tomorrow they'll be passing a bill that I had actually authored out of the House that has to do with autistic drivers being able to notify police by filling out a form when they get their tag that they have autism or some other neurological condition that makes it hard for police to interact with them. Yeah. So if it's in a stressful situation, the police officer understands immediately why. It's not that they're being belligerent or anything. They're just, difficult to communicate with under stressful circumstances. So that'll be passing tomorrow. And I'm like, yay for that. But these elections bills, brother. Oh my gosh. We should probably spend a whole half hour on that. Because there are some that are really good. And I wrote out some recommendations on my way out the door in a form of a memo to the chairman of the former chairman now of the Governmental Affairs Committee in the House. And they passed one of those out of the Senate yesterday.
SB 67, right?
I'm not sure what the bill number is, but I'll tell you what it does. And it requires that the number of ballots that have been cast are reported immediately. So,
oh wow.
And so you don't have this delivery in the middle of the night of doctored ballots showing up at 4:00 in the morning. They have to actually say these were received in our office by 7 p.m. We have 15,000 total ballots in our county, and that's how many we're going to count. And so they have to report that immediately, rather than this trickle in, which doesn't do anything for voter confidence. So that passed the Senate yesterday. That was one of my recommendations. So I kept an eye on that.
And if you remember the November 4th, the eyes of the world were already starting to turn on Georgia, and Brad Raffensperger stands up and says, we have X number of ballots from this county and X number from that county, and so on and so forth. And people started, making calculations based on that and thinking, well, Trump's won Georgia, when that wasn't the number of ballots. And I'm not throwing Brad under the bus. He was given bad information, and I'm not accusing anybody of any malfeasance. I'm just saying they didn't know. They didn't really know how many ballots there were. So no, that's a brilliant idea, because and of course that gave rise to all sorts of rumors and conspiracies, because Brad stood up and he was embarrassed because he gave out wrong information when the whole world was watching us. So that absolutely needs to be fixed.
And it's something like that happened on January 5th as well, because you had, I think, Gabriel Sterling, who we all know, and like Gabriel was giving out information that they were receiving from DeKalb County. I think he said at one point there was like 117,000 ballots still remaining. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it ended up being like, there's actually 171,000 ballots still out. And I'm watching on CNN going, oh my God, like the conspiracy theories are going to start again. And it's certainly, sure enough, I saw a few people tweeting about that, and I promptly unfollowed them on Twitter. But I mentioned SB 67. That's the absentee voter ID bill. So what we're talking about, different bills, Scott. I know the House has got its own kind of sort of omnibus package that they're working through.
And in typical House fashion, they announced it the day before and had a hearing on it the very next day. And so I haven't had a chance to read it. I couldn't tell you what's in it.
48 pages.
Yeah, 48 pages, probably some of my ideas in there still, and it's probably a lot that aren't. But, one of the things that I really tried to do as a House member was never give the Democrats a club to beat me over the head with. And a lot of these bills and a lot of these proposals are clubs that the Democrats are going to use to beat the head of Republicans. And
they already are.
I saw one bill that requires you to have voted in person prior to voting by mail. Which is a ridiculous idea, but probably a Republican that's trying to show that they're worth their salt with the Republican crowd, that they're going to tamp down on this voter fraud that happens in the mail. Just a terrible idea, and a club that somebody's going to use against other Republicans. That Republican is in a safe district, so it's not going to affect them any. But in a tight district, somebody's going to come along and say, this is what Republicans are trying to do, and they're going to beat some other House rep in a very close district next time around.
Yeah. One thing that a couple bills that we're really watching, House Bill 60 by Representative Wes Cantrell would create education scholarship accounts. And these are accounts that it's a school choice bill. It would allow parents to then go, if they want to, leave the public school, and go to a private school, go do homeschooling, even stay in the public school and spend some of that money on other education-related expenses that would be approved, an approved list. So it's gained a lot of momentum this year because of how school systems have responded to the pandemic. Parents, poll after poll after poll shows parents are just not happy, and they want change. And so this is if you've been a school choice advocate like me and Scott and many Jason, many others for years, this is our golden opportunity. If we can't get this bill across the finish line now,
Yeah, right.
so we've got a great chance. A bill passed out of the Senate Education Youth Committee, Senate Bill 47, I believe the number is, by Senator Steve Gooch. It fixes a loophole in Georgia's special needs scholarship account, and it will open that. There's a lot of students who should be eligible for it but are not because of this loophole. So this opens it up, and it passed the Senate last year but got kind of died because of the pandemic. And so hopefully
let's be honest, it died because it was being carried by Renee Unterman, and and the House leadership didn't want any of Renee's bills to pass in her final session.
So as far
That's
as
what
we
really
know,
happened.
As far as we know, House leadership still likes Steve Gooch. So
he's a member of leadership in the Senate, so
yes,
that's going to be his advantage.
Yeah.
That we're talking about the intrigue of the politics of the Georgia legislature.
Yeah.
In one bill I'm watching, SB 105, introduced by State Senator Brian Strickland, who is my state senator, would require individuals on probation serve at least 3 years of probation and successfully meet other eligibility criteria to have their probation terminated. So basically early termination of probation. That bill is on the floor tomorrow in the Senate. So hoping that bill makes it out. Unfortunately, Brian has another bill that I'm not so fond of, which basically it suspends the right to a speedy trial. So we'll see how that one goes once it hits federal courts. I'm sure the 11th Circuit is not going to smile fondly on that one, nor the Supreme Court when it comes up there. But it's been an interesting legislative session. I know we have about 7 minutes left, but I know redistricting is going to come back up soon. And obviously you have that problem up in Northwest Georgia and Marjorie Taylor Greene. You have the state legislature redistricting, reapportionment. I don't want to get too in the weeds on this because this is really a subject for next week if we want to do this again. But I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine who does a lot of work under the Gold Dome, and we were talking about whether Republicans learned anything from the election, and his response to me was, Jason, what do you think? They're going to do the same thing they always do, which is they're going to reapportion and redistrict to ensure themselves majorities in the state House and state Senate for the next 10 years. Yep. And let me ask you both a question. So we've already discussed this somewhat about learning how to appeal the Republican base or Republican, how make the Republican Party more appealing. There's that side of the equation, but we're seeing bills come through the legislature right now that try to curtail the governor's power in some way. Coming into 2022, I think Governor Kemp is at a serious risk of losing re-election to Stacey Abrams. Do you think there's going to be any wholesale attempt by Georgia lawmakers to either statutorily, and obviously some of this is going to have to go through, at least probably much of this actually will probably have to go through the voters by amending the Constitution. Do you think there's any appetite inside the legislature amongst Republicans to do something like that? Because the governor sets the budget target for the year. Yeah. So, the governor has lots of power under our Constitution. So are they going to try to amend those powers in some way? Either one of you jump in.
They should. And there's a small attempt around the health emergency powers. Yep. Because it's the first time it's ever been used. And I give Governor Kemp credit. I think when you read that statute, he has all sorts of power under that healthcare emergency to do all sorts of stuff, and he's been very restrained, to his credit. Yeah. But it makes perfect sense to review that law since it's the first time it's ever really been used. Yeah. But they need to look at everything up and down. There's a lot of things you could do. Subpoena power for House and Senate. Committees would be a great thing that could help bring about more of a balance of power. But you have to think about it in context. It was up into the early 70s before the House of Representatives got to pick its own speaker. So this idea of co-equal branches has not really been the tradition in Georgia, but it should be.
Yeah. Separation of powers. was a good
Yeah,
thing.
I think part of the problem, in going down this road of wanting to weaken the governor ahead of Stacey Abrams running for governor, is you have people that are in the Senate specifically. They're eyeing the governor's mansion for themselves, and they're not. I think politically speaking, they're going to be hesitant to want to try to rein in executive power and authority. I think for the first time, the speaker is interested in that debate. I don't think he would have been under Nathan Deal. As a matter of fact, I could say that we passed several things. I think that Buzz and I probably both voted against that strengthened the executive and gave away legislative authority and power to the executive. And anytime we tried to rein it in, we didn't even get hearings for those bills. But I bet they get hearings now, at least in the House. I think it's going to be a tougher row to hoe when it comes to getting that through the Senate.
Yeah. Well, guys, I want to thank you guys both for joining what is the first Peach Pundit podcast. Like, I think this is something we could have fun with and do again, and I'm certainly open to it. Rotating out, contributors, adding another one, buying a better Zoom subscription so I can have unlimited amount of time. So, because I know we could have done this for
oh yeah,
for
we need
90
to stop.
minutes.
45 minutes is good.
No. So I'll go ahead and make a purchase to get a better, a more significant Zoom account. I'm actually using my work Zoom account right now, which I did not realize until we got started. And but no, thanks guys for joining us. For those of you listening, we're gonna have. I know you're probably watching this on the Peach Pundit website. We're gonna put this on probably up on iTunes, on Apple Podcasts, and also on SoundCloud, so you can listen to it in your car rather than watch us, because I know you guys don't want to see our faces anyway. So please keep visiting peachpundit.com. We're still in the process of getting it back up and running. Got a little bit more to go, but we're getting Buzz. I know has contributed quite a bit already, and Scott, I know you've contributed quite a bit already. And so if you're interested in contributing, shoot me an email, jason@peachpundit.com, and we're going to keep trucking along and hopefully get Peach Pundit back up to where it was in the glory days. So thanks folks for listening. Buzz, Scott, thanks for joining. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much. See y'all soon.